Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today, I'm delighted and honoured to be speaking with mental performance coach Brian Levenson. Brian, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Dan, thanks so much. I know we're going to talk about my book that's coming out, and I'm about to record the audio for it. And I think rather than me record it with my American accent and my scratchy voice, I'm going to let you record it for me with that beautiful voice of yours. Man, I could just fall asleep listening to you. So anyway, I'm really, really glad to be here.
Well, trust me, many people have fallen asleep listening to me. I can assure you, it's not always that gripping, but thank you. Look, it's great to have you on. Why don't we get started by you introducing yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Yeah, so I'm based outside Washington, D.C. in Bethesda, Maryland. Got two small kids at home, a 3.5-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. My 3.5-year-old, I've said this on a lot of podcasts, she gives us a little bit of a tough time. She's an amazing human, fierce. Hopefully she grows up to be, a star soccer player or a star at whatever she wants to do, because watch out world, my daughter's coming for you. And my son is just an amazing, amazing boy and happily married. So I would start there. I think once you get married, for me, marriage wasn't that big of a transition because I lived with my wife before we got married. But the kids, like your whole life just kind of changes and your focus changes. And we'll talk about selfishness and selflessness today a little bit, but you really start to focus on them. And even in the middle of the night or in the morning when they're screaming or yelling. But besides that, I work as a mental performance coach and an executive coach. So I got my master's in sports psychology at the time. I thought, gosh, I want to work with athletes. Hit the ground running there about a decade ago and started working with all kinds of athletes. I know you're passionate about golf. I started working with a lot of golfers. I had a mentor, Julie Elliott, who works with a lot of top PGA Tour pros, and Julie publicly worked with Phil Mickelson and some others. And Julie was the one that introduced me to sports psychology. And I was very, very fortunate that when I was in grad school, I knew where I wanted to go and what it looked like. So I had Julie mentor me, worked alongside her for a few years and broke off on my own. And ever since then, I've been working with sports teams, organizations, high school, college, pro, athletes, and all kinds of sports. I'm not somebody who wants to just be in one sport. I love working with people in multiple sports. And then because I love working with different types of people, I ended up doing a lot of executive coaching and really fell in love with that world. I love working with leaders at the C-suite level who can set the culture of their organization, help them with their mission, their vision, their values, their philosophy, that sort of stuff. And then the ripple effect that can occur from that. So my world today is probably 50% corporate, 50% sport. I find in the sport world, what I'm really interested in, you said before we hit record that you work with some coaches. I love working with coaches. And I think at the end of the day, I really care about impact. And so I'm less interested in maybe the transactional nature of a golfer winning a tournament or a basketball player getting 30 points a game or a soccer player scoring a goal or a football player scoring a goal. I'm really interested in working with interesting, complex people who are asking tough questions and thinking about challenges and environments. And so anyway, that's sort of a lay of the land. I hope I did a good enough job explaining my background and sort of where I'm at and where I'm going.
I do have a question for you there before we move on to the book, because I'm really excited to talk about your new book. But you mentioned not being as motivated by the transactional side of things and more the transformational. And obviously you brought that to life by talking about, well, if they score goals, if they shoot great rounds, make lots of money, that's nice, but you're more interested in the complexity of people. Was that something that was really interesting to me? Because definitely, although I'd like to think I'm tailored that way, it's still wonderful to watch when a client shoots low or wins a tournament or finishes top 10 or gets in the team or scores goals. Is that something that comes naturally? Is that why you do what you do? Did that come naturally? Do you still have even half an eye on the outcomes, the results?
Yeah. Look, I'm competitive. I worked out this morning. I hired a trainer to help me work out because I don't like to work out. I'm not one of those people. And today he's like, if you hold your plank for X amount of time, you only have to do one. And I was like, well, why don't you just do that all the time with me? Because I'm going to do it. And so I am highly competitive, and I don't want to disparage transaction or winning and losing. The reason I got into sports was I was absolutely drawn to that. And I love that. And to me, I can understand it. And I know you're obsessed with the process. I've heard you many times. I think, so first of all, I still work with a lot of athletes. I think I'll always work with athletes. I'm not anti working with athletes. And when I first started doing this work, at one point I was working with like 30 golfers, and you're watching the scores and you're watching and you're like living and breathing with every single, hole. And I just realized that wasn't going to be very healthy. And at one point I was working with, all these athletes and all these teams, and, there's lots of winning, but in sports there is lots of losing. Like, I think that's a big difference between sports and the corporate world, is the highs and lows are just very different. And maybe on Wall Street, if you're a trader, you get some of that, but the winning, the lows of losing and the way they feel if you're really invested are really tough. And so I think I learned relatively early in my career that I needed to disassociate myself from the outcome, winning and losing. So I think a coach's job is to realize, like, our job is to ask great questions, provide skills, provide frameworks, theories, research, and understand that your success is not tied to your clients. And at the end of the day, they're the one that has to do the heavy lifting. And I think it's even for sports coaches. Like, the sports coaches I most respect understand that the players are the ones that are going to do the heavy lifting. And perhaps we need to take our ego a little bit outside of it. And so I say all that to say, I still love being part of a team. I think one of the things I don't love is being by myself. I like working for myself. So I love working with an organization or a team and seeing the team success. And that is maybe a little more transactional in nature. But I find an individual athlete, if they are open-minded, curious, driven, ambitious, like, I'm game, like, let's go do it. I think you're hearing the tension or the friction for me. I also just have had so many athletes think that, this is a magic set of beads, and because the game is very mental, that they're going to work with me and now they're going to be fixed, and nothing works like that. So I like the long game. I like being invested in the long game, and I believe in the work we do. I think it's really important, and I know that there's a lot that goes into success in sports.
It's really interesting listening to what you're saying there, because having been a pro golfer, it's quite endemic in golf, whereby golfers are in essence translated coming to you and saying, make me better, or sometimes help me feel better, but make me better. And there is an element, and as I say, I feel I have permission to say this because I've been a pro golfer, I've been a golf coach, I've been around the block when it comes to golf, and I know how tough golfers can be. And there is a problem in the industry where they can go from coach to coach to coach to coach looking for solutions. I think that landscape is easing and getting better now as they start to explore better ways of practicing, better ways to establish relationships with coaches. But that needs to also filter through to auxiliary staff, if you want to call us that, sports psychologists. And I think the historical context was, help me to focus, help me to feel confident, help me to do this. And if you can't, then on your bike, basically, mate, off you go. So it's interesting to hear you say that. And that's where it can be quite stressful in our profession, because we want to help them. We want them to score better, feel better, enjoy their life, etc., etc. But there is a little bit of a pressure to say the right things, or to intervene in the right way, to ask the right question. And ultimately, there are so many things out of your control that the jigsaw doesn't always fit all of the time perfectly.
And Dan, I know you're a fan of positive psychology, as am I. And how many times are you on a golf course and they find out what you do, and some guy says, "Oh, you really need to work with my buddy," and they point to their buddy, and it's almost like, and I then say to them, actually, that's not the work that I do. Like, I'm actually not very passionate about the yips, or working with somebody who's really mentally struggling. I know others that love working with those people, but for me, I love helping people that are already good get better, and where I can learn from them as well. And maybe it's a little selfish on my end, but I like taking things a little next level. And so It is. It's just, I think, a lens with which you're looking at your clients and how you like to work with people. So I love working with rock stars. Like I love working with superstars who are already like really strong and want to get stronger. I call it adding the ERs. Like you're strong and you want to get stronger. There's an ER at the end of that. You're smart. You want to get smarter. There's an ER at the end of that. And a lot of times those ERs are extra reps. And so that's why I like to call them the ERs. Like, what are your extra reps? And for some, extra reps can be, lifting more weight or eating a certain way or getting enough sleep. Or for others, it's seeing someone like yourself or myself. So I like working with those people that are getting those extra reps and are on the path to greatness and want to try to achieve. And the troubleshooting stuff it's just not as interesting for me. But that's myself. I'm not. I've realized I don't have to be all things to all people. And for me, like, I just want to have alignment of values and an alignment of where we're trying to go. And from that place, a lot of great stuff can happen.
I don't need to be all things to all people. That's certainly a piece of advice I probably need to adopt. It's interesting, Brian, you talk about helping people go from strong to stronger, from smart to smarter. And it might be a small shift, but it's still a shift. I'm guessing that you're trying to help them make, which is a neat segue. I think you can see what I did there is a neat segue onto your book, your forthcoming book, which is called Shift Your Mind, 9 Mental Shifts to Thrive in Preparation and Performance. We're going to go through each of these 9 mental shifts. I'm really, really excited and looking forward to tapping into your knowledge of these mental shifts. But before we get into what you mean by shift your mind and what that bears relationship with, a little bit of a selfish question on my part here, because I've written 4 books and I'm in the process of writing number 5. One of the things is, do you create a title and a subtitle and align the book with that? Or can you write the book and then create a title or subtitle? It sounds to me like you wrote the book and then created a title.
What we had was a framework. So we knew the framework. And so like, I knew that I had this polarity that existed, or these binaries that existed, or these shifts is what we ended up calling them, that existed between preparation mind and performance mind. And so we knew that each chapter was going to be a shift. And when I say we, like my publisher, I hired a writing coach because I believe in coaching and I had never written a book. So you've written 4. God bless you for that. And I wanted to write a great book. Like if I'm going to talk about greatness, then I need to put myself around people that can help me get there. And so I hired, a writing coach who was amazing. I actually started with one writing coach, and he actually came up with a book title, and we didn't end up using that title. And I think part of it was because, about coaching, I think we probably both believe that we want to work from the inside out, not the outside in when working with people. What we mean by that is asking great questions, helping someone figure out what do they look like when they're at their best, and then going from there. My first writing coach was a brilliant guy, great author. I think he was used to maybe doing a lot of ghostwriting, and I was not going to have someone write my book. Like it was going to be my words, my vocabulary, for better or for worse. I wanted it to be me. And so he turned to me one day and said, Brian, do you think you want to go in a different direction? And I was like, yeah, I do. And so I ended up switching coaches, and I hired this woman, Larry Bishop, who was just an amazing coach. And she really helped tease out of me and suss out of me the title. And then we collaborated with my publisher to figure out the title. But to answer your question more succinctly, we had the framework. I started writing with the framework, and then the title started to come along as the book started to progress. And then the subtitle came after that to make sure we had the verbiage that we wanted on that cover.
Love it. Interesting stuff. And you've used these words, binary, polarity. Shift is in the title. You've mentioned preparation, performance. So I'm guessing this is what it's all about, Brian. It's about the difference between preparation and performance, the shift. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Interestingly, writing the book, I got to explore these shifts. So there were lots of times where I needed to be humble and really put my head down and do the work and be selfish with my time. Like there was time when I had to go away from my family for a day and just write. And so those were like preparations that I did in order to then go and perform and just write, just like, punch the keys and just go. There was a movie called Finding Forrester. Are you familiar with that? And Sean Connery.
No, I'm not.
So Sean Connery should be up your alley, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it's this great book, and he starts working with this young basketball player who's also a writer, and there's this brilliant part where Sean Connery is a famous author, and he's got this young basketball player, and he's teaching him how to write, and he just goes, "Punch the keys, boy!" And that's my British accent. That's the best I could do. And he's just getting them to write and just perform, like, just play, just go, just be arrogant. Like, and so I say all that to say, like, writing the book was an exercise for me in shifting my mind. There were times where I needed to be really humble and get feedback. And then there were other times where I just needed to trust my instinct and just go and perform. And so the book essentially is about 9 shifts. It's not the 9, because I don't believe there is a but it's about 9 of these shifts that I drilled down on to shift your mind in preparation and performance, and understand that what you do in preparation drastically impacts your performance. And this notion that we should probably practice our performance mind more often than we do. So, for example, soccer, which I know is a sport, or football is a sport that you're passionate about. What we do in training really matters. When we go small-sided, we're performing. Like, we're in this area where we just need to trust our instincts and move and go fast. Whereas when you're doing a cone drill, or you are watching film, like, you need to be more in your preparation mind. And golf is another sport. Like, if you're working on your swing mechanics on the range, that's great and all, but at some point you need to practice your full routine and actually practice maybe a shot that's going to be in a divot, or, go to the short game area and practice shots that are, sloped and what have you, or from the rough. So I think golf does a pretty bad job of practicing your performance mind, because the driving range is set up to make it easier. Whereas I think soccer, a lot of teams do a good job of training their performance mind as much as possible. So we could get in all that, but that's a little more detail and background on the book.
No, it's really interesting, as you were talking about, writing and the shifts you had to make with writing. It reminded me of me. There's a time when I have to feel really relaxed when I'm writing, and I'm kind of writing more in a philosophical style. And hey, doesn't matter, you made a bogey, just move on. And then there's other times where I try to shift it up a few gears, and I turn up the volume of intensity, and I literally got to have some music in my ears. And yeah, that really resonates what you said there. You've got to have those shifts when you write in accordance with the sort of the themes and the feelings that the themes you're writing about, and the feelings that you're trying to create in the reader.
There's an old adage, write drunk and edit sober. And while I did not write this book drunk, trust me, I think that I love that idea of, like, just let it go, right? Like, just punch the keys, and just write, and then come back and get feedback, analyze, break it down, and learn and grow in that space. And so for me, preparation is the action or process of making ourselves ready and competent. Like, that's what preparation is all about. Is it's growing, it's learning, it's improving. But performance is about execution. It's different. The act of performing is about having, like, this ability to execute, especially for a lot of the athletes we work with in the arena, where there is an evaluation or a judgment that's going to occur. If you are Beyonce and you're performing at the Super Bowl, like, there's a lot of eyeballs on you, Beyonce. You're going to be judged. You're going to be evaluated. This matters. If you're in the show Hamilton on Broadway, like, this matters. If you're a dentist and you are, performing, like, there are consequences here. A surgeon, a lawyer, and you're, in the courtroom, like, there comes a time where you have to execute. And then I believe sports actually does a really good job. We have practice. And practice, to me, a great practice is the combination of both the preparation mind and the performance mind. So we were talking about soccer earlier. It's this combination of repeated proficiency. It's about, executing, and it's about growing. And so you have to practice the ability to execute under pressure and deal with that. And you have to get better and grow. And so I think a great organization in sports will spend time on both of those in practice. So I make distinctions between preparation, performance, and practice, because I think it creates some clarity for us to think about, well, when am I in preparation mind and when am I in performance mind? And if we can think about the when, which almost never gets talked about in psychology, we can be more effective. And if you've ever taken a personality assessment, we were talking about this before we started recording, and you're taking it and you're like, well, it depends. And like, I almost wanted to call the book It Depends or When or something in that world, because like we need these different elements of ourselves to come out at different times. And authenticity is not rigid. We have different pieces of ourselves. Like authenticity is beautiful, but I know for me, like I have a side of me that like when we're in between the lines, like I can bring out a side to me that is different than how I am maybe with my kids. And that's okay. We don't have to be one way all the time. And I think too often we think of authenticity as, oh, you're just the same way all the time. And I don't know. I have different emotions just like everybody else. I get angry, I get sad, I get happy. Those are, primary emotions that I feel, and they're part of me. So anyway, that's me riffing a little bit on the book and some of the stuff that's in it as well.
No, I love it, and it's interesting because I'm conscious that you're talking away and saying some great stuff and dropping some little gems for me personally. And what I want to do here, I do want to come onto these shifts, these 9 shifts, and I think we'll start with. So preparation and performance, the first shift is humble and arrogant. And it's interesting. And let me start this off here by saying that from a personal perspective, from my own game book, if you like, I walked onto the first tee way too humble. I would say anxious as well, probably pretty neurotic. But boy, if I'd walked onto the first tee arrogant, and I know a lot of people hate that term, but we'll talk about that. If I had walked onto that first tee arrogant, I may not have got in the world's top 200, 500, maybe not the world's top 1,000, but I tell you what, I would have won a lot more money. I would have had more fun. I would have got the ball in the hole quicker. So humble to arrogant, preparation, performance. Let's go with that first shift.
We didn't use the word arrogant lightly, and I understand the feedback I'm going to get from some people around arrogant is they're going to get triggered by it. I've seen it when I bring it up. And just, so I'll start there, that we were very humble in our decision to use the word arrogant. And so what do we mean? Humble is having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's own importance. It's this capacity to get feedback, to learn, to grow, and to really think about, there's even something called intellectual humility, to really be open to teaching and to bettering yourself and having an appreciation of others' strengths. And I think in preparation, when you do that, you're constantly working on your weaknesses. And you said you were very humble when you went to the first tee. You probably did a good job, probably some perfectionism, which we'll get into in a little bit, like constantly getting better, wanting to get better. And that's huge in preparation. And when we get to the first tee, we need to shift out of that. And we need to have a sense of arrogance, which to me, the definition that we use, a distinction that we use, is having or revealing an exaggerated sense of one's own importance or abilities. We mentioned Beyonce, Kobe, Hemingway, take Messi, Ronaldo, Carly Lloyd, who you had on your podcast, who I actually mentioned in my book, and I'm fascinated by her journey because she actually needed to work on her preparation mind. Where she really struggled early in her career was she did not put the work in, but she was really talented and she had more of a performance mind. And to be transparent, I'm actually better at my performance mind than I am my preparation mind. But I will tell you, most of my clients that get to elite levels, college and pro, they're really good at the preparation mind. Sports is a great petri dish for the preparation mind because it's set up. People are coached to be really good in preparation. They have coaches, they have systems in place to be really good at preparation. And I find what often gets in the way for elite performers is more along the performance mind. So anyway, the reason we use arrogance, it's not necessarily flexing your muscles like Muhammad Ali or like Usain Bolt. It can show up like that, but it also can be Stephen Curry, who you don't think of as that way, or I use basketball guys. I know you're more of a football guy, soccer guy. I don't know soccer as much as you do, and I grew up with basketball, so we're gonna meet at the intersection of golf. Maybe it can be Dustin Johnson or Brooks Koepka, and sort of listen to those guys talk, and you hear this sense of arrogance. But I think Rory McIlroy has done a really good job of working on his mind and shifting his mind and thinking about when does he need to be humble and when does he need to bring out arrogance. And I think Jordan Spieth, and these aren't clients of mine that I'm talking about, is still figuring out his arrogant mind, because I think he had it when he first started and now has been humbled in a certain way and needs to find ways to get there. And so anyway, I didn't use confidence here. This came from Tom Coughlin, the New York Football Giants head coach who won 2 Super Bowls and has been in football for a long, long time. He wrote a book called Earn the Right to Win. And I really enjoyed his book. And in it, he talked about being humble enough to prepare and confident enough to perform. I would argue you need confidence all the time. So if you're going to be humble, it actually takes a certain amount of confidence and belief in yourself to go into that space to be humble. I think like fake humility doesn't do anybody favors. Like true confidence is your willingness to step into that and be like, yeah, I believe in myself, but I need to get better. Whereas arrogance is unshakable. It's unflappable. Like when you see an arrogant performer, they might, be 3 or 4 over after 9 holes and they still have this belief in themselves. Or they might miss 3 opportunities to score in football or soccer, and they still believe the next one's going to go in. And I think Ronaldo is actually a great soccer example of this inner arrogance that he has. And I want to emphasize, it doesn't have to be what you're saying out loud, but I do think it's what you're saying internally. I do think it's the dialogue and the self-talk, as we would call it in psychology. I think if you study those elite performers, the Beyoncés of the world, her Sasha Fierce is this internal belief in herself because she's earned it through humble preparation. So that's the first one. And I use all kinds of examples in the book that sort of break that down and sort of break that out. And actually around leadership, there's some research that shows that if you're just a humble leader all the time, it can backfire in teams. You can lose your team. Because at some point they need you to believe in that you can change the world and do something amazing. We see this with tech people like Zuckerberg or Jobs, or pick your tech superstar, like this vision that to do something to change the world. Elon Musk is a great example. Like, who in their right mind believes that they can do what he's done with Tesla and now SpaceX? Well, there's some arrogant performance going on there that I think we should all acknowledge. So that's humble and arrogant.
No, I love it. And I have to say, I agree with you. I mean, there's a feel of a state versus trait scenario here that you separated out confidence from arrogance, and, maybe they're on the same continuum, maybe they're not, it's very subjective, but I almost love that idea of actually confidence is something else, and we have to strive to build our confidence daily. And that, for me, confidence is a very emotional thing. Self-belief is a bit more of a cerebral thing. But that notion of arrogance when you walk to the first tee, if we're going to talk golf here, you've got to be able to walk off the 18th green with the same arrogance, having shot 5 under level or 5 over. You've got to come off the pitch. If we're talking soccer here, if you've lost 3-0, you're a striker, you haven't scored, you've missed a few opportunities, you've got to have the capacity to walk off with the same strut. Obviously you don't necessarily want the crowd to see that, having lost 5-0, but that inner sense of arrogance. Whilst then on Monday morning at the training ground, back with your teammates, back with your coach, you humbly work to put things right, to make things better. But it's overwhelmingly challenging to compete, certainly at the adult elite level, effectively and efficaciously if you can't do so with those steps of arrogance, internal arrogance, in my opinion.
And we've all seen it where somebody becomes overly humble in their performance. For me, it gets in the way for a lot of my clients. And here's the reality. We spend way more time preparing than we do performing. So if you're an elite performer, you're going to spend so much time in that preparation mind. And that's why I believe it's important to practice the performance mind and make sure you're getting reps. So look, I think like there's the Roger Federers of the world who are really good. Like he steps off the court, he does an interview, he's back into the humble mind and he does a really good job. But then you have like a Richard Sherman in the NFL who comes off and, is still in that performance mind, and we got him interviewed. Or you see it with Usain Bolt or Serena Williams sometimes is you see her in that state still. So look, I don't want to be around arrogant people. I don't like arrogance per se. And I believe it is absolutely necessary when you're between the lines, and your ability to then shift out of it and get back into humble preparation is huge. And to me, one of the guys who mastered this was Kobe Bryant. I mean, he was so curious. He said his favorite book was Curious George. He would go work on his footwork with Akeem Olajuwon, a center in the NBA who was known for his footwork. He would do everything. He'd study Michael Jackson and other elite performers in other industries, like so humble in his preparation. But when he got between the lines, talk about Sasha Fierce. Like I actually have a video of him talking about Beyonce because he recognizes game. Like the dude created Mamba mentality after he got accused of sexual assault. And he knew he needed to have this inner arrogance in every arena he went to. He was going to get harassed and yelled at, and people were going to say things to him. And he knew that if he was 5 for 20, he needed to keep shooting and stay with it. And I think it's one of the reasons he's one of the best basketball players of all time. And there's other people that had his talent and are not one of the best basketball players of all time. So to me, this is the one I wanted to start with in the book, because I think it's one that, once again, I know that there are words in the book that people are going to see and they're going to be, wait a second, that's bad. And I just want people to think about what's bad and what's good for their performance, because a lot of times what we're told is good or bad in society is not necessarily what's helpful for us or harmful for us when we're performing.
No, well, and you're specifically talking about in-game, in-performance mindsets here, and there's we won't go down this path, but there's an interesting, because this would be a whole podcast in itself, an interesting conversation around taking arrogance away from performance into not just preparation mode, but everyday life, and how that leads to maladaptiveness. But look, let's go on to shift number 2, and that's work and play. Tell me a little bit about that.
And before we do, I do want to make this point. There are great books to learn about how to be a great human being. Philosophy, go read a religious text. People have written awesome works on integrity and what it means to be a good human being. I would rather my kids be great human beings than great performers. So I'm not suggesting that one is more important than the other. All I'm saying is my expertise and where I have been is working with people inside the arena as performers. And just because you're a great performer doesn't mean that you're a great human being. Just because you're a great human being doesn't mean you're a great performer. So I think there's just a distinction that's important there that I would just point out. The next one is around work and play. And so work to me is a job. Like, let's approach our preparation as if this is a job. A lot of times in sports, they'll say that guy's a pro. And what they usually mean by that is he shows up early, stays late, or he, gets his sleep, or he's eating right. He takes it like it's a job and prepares as if this is work. But we play sports. We play instruments. A musical is when you go on stage, it's a play. And I think if you study the great performers, you'll find out that they shift from, hey, this is a job, I'm going to work, and this is a business. And then they shift out of that and go into play. And even when you talked about listening to music earlier, a lot of great performers, the music that they'll listen to on game day might be more joyful. It might be more playful. What they need to do to get themselves ready to perform is much more about joy and play and almost acting as if they're a kid again. So there's a phrase that I love, which is think like a pro and play like a kid. And I think it's like prepare like a pro and play like a kid. And you watch a 10-year-old go play soccer or football, and they're just playing. They're often like not concerned about the outcome, and they're just kind of going at it and doing all kinds of creative stuff. That's what I really mean in this shift, is the ability to really drill down and act as if it's work in preparation and take it seriously, and then shift into performance as play. And too often we don't take our our practice preparation serious enough, and then we make games it's like life and death, and then we create tension in the body, and we don't necessarily perform at our best. When you study championship teams, you'll often see a joy that they play with, and they love each other, and they're smiling, and they're like in Washington D.C. We've had 2 championship teams in the last couple of years: the Washington Nationals, the baseball team, and then the Washington Capitals, the hockey team. And both of those teams for the last decade really have been expected to win championships, and they never did. And if you study them when they won their championships, joy and play was talked about a lot. The Nationals would dance in the dugout after home runs. They would do the baby shark chant and clap in the stadium, like silly stuff on the day of a performance. And I really think it helped them perform when they're relaxed, and just playing with that joy in that play.
When you use the word play, I'm thinking freedom. I'm thinking creativity. And it's interesting you talk about I always often talk about tough and tolerant. And you're talking about athletes, competitors being too tough on themselves with performance and not playful enough, and probably too not playful but too relaxed around preparation, and shifting that, so being much tougher on themselves with their preparation and much more tolerant on their performance. Just play, just be free, enjoy it, be creative, express yourself. And the last thing I want to say there before you make your comment is that I almost feel there's a relationship between the play and the arrogant part, in as much as the arrogance feels like the intensity, nothing and no one is going to touch me here. This is who I am. This is what I do. But there's a sweet spot there when it's combined with that playful freedom and creativity. Then there's that sweet spot of intensity. Essentially.
There's also vulnerability at play here. And Brene Brown's work on vulnerability is so fascinating, and she links it with courage. And to me, we'll get to fearlessness in a little bit. So you can see there's overlap. These can blend into each other. And I also want to preface this by saying not every performance is going to leverage the binaries or shifts that we talk about in the book. Like your job might be like, nope, I can't be in play mode. Totally cool. Like, this isn't a one size fits all deal. These are just the 9 that I felt were most present in what I studied. It is easier for us to stay humble in performance on that first tee and not have the vulnerability to put ourselves out there and say, yeah, I've got this. Because if we do step into arrogance or play and then we screw up, there's some shame and embarrassment that can come with that. Like, it's easier to play it safe and to be fearful and then be like, oh, I just can't do it, than to be like, no, I know I can do it, and I'm going to step into this, and I'm capable of doing far more. It's the same thing in business. It's easier for us to sort of fear success in a way and not ever tap into that side of us. And I think that's one of the reasons I love sports, is to watch when elite performers tap into that. Carly Lloyd scoring 4 goals in the World Cup. Like, what the F? Like, that is awesome. Watching the U.S. national team score 11 goals or 6, whatever in a game, like, and get called arrogant. Well, okay, but that they're in the flow state. They are playing, they are being challenged, and they are stepping up. Like, it's way easier to hide in the corner. For all of us, it's easier for me to not publish a book or be on a podcast or put myself out there. I'm not going to get ridiculed. I will say something stupid in this interview. I will. And there will be something I say that I probably will regret when I listen to it 3 years from now or a week from now. There will. It's easier to not put yourself out there, to be vulnerable. But if you want to achieve greatness, you have to have a level of that arrogance and that play if you want to step into that space and to step into the arena. So that's how I would link it all together.
Oh, I love it. I love it. The next shift, future and present. Tell me about future and present.
We all know, play present, be where your feet are. These have been things that philosophers have been talking about in all walks of life. You look at our religious texts, they talk about presence and being present. This isn't new. Meditation and mindfulness certainly have come into the mainstream world in a way that's really cool and really interesting. And I sort of look at my philosophy as a blend of mindfulness, positive psychology, and cognitive behavioral theory. I like to live at those intersections. And that's what I've spent a lot of time studying. So I love being present in performance. And I think it's really important to have a vision and to visualize and to look ahead and to spend some time in the preparation thinking about where do I want to go and what does that look like? And so to me, this is a nice blend. In preparation, we'll be very future focused. And then in performance, let's be where our feet are. Let's give ourselves the space to play present. And so to me, it's sort of a simple one. I think the Blue Angels are fighter pilots that are American. They put on these shows all over the world, really. And if you study them, they do a great job visualizing and going through every maneuver they're going to make in the air while they're flying these fighter pilots hundreds of miles an hour within feet of each other. It's crazy. And yet they spend all this time preparing and visualizing and seeing it. And when they are in the fighter pilot, they need to be present and need to be grounded in, that state of existing and occurring in the now. And so if you study elite performers, whether it's Michael Phelps or, Carly Lloyd or whoever you want to study, you'll notice that they often are thinking about the future, but when they get between the lines, they're much more moment to moment. So that's what that shift is really all about.
Next shift is perfectionistic to adaptable.
Yeah, and I listened to one of your podcasts where you talked about perfectionism getting in the way for yourself. And I think when I work with pro athletes, I'll often say, are you perfectionistic? And almost always they'll say yes. And so why is that? Because it's a demand for the highest standard of excellence. Your demand for yourself, even though you're never going to be perfect, you demand getting that swing exactly right, or the shooting mechanics exactly right. And the relentless pursuit it's in perfectionism. And so there's all kinds of, studies, like a Harvard Business Review found that people with perfectionistic tendencies are more motivated on the job. They work longer hours. They're more engaged at work. But you mentioned maladaptive and adaptive. That is what determines whether it is effective. And look, that word adaptive is literally what determines whether or not perfectionism is useful or not. So why wouldn't we then use adaptive in our performance? And we mentioned Beyonce earlier, like she talks about perfectionism. Everything has to be right. Yet when she gets on stage, if the lighting's not perfect, if a dancer makes the wrong move or she slips, like she's not sitting there being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I screwed up. She's adapting, she's adjusting. And so to me, these go so hand in hand, and the ability to be perfect in preparation and adaptive in performance. I think about my wedding day. Me and my wife spent 8 months planning our wedding day, dotting all our I's, crossing all our T's, flowers, which I wasn't really involved with, the band and, all this stuff. And the day of my wedding day, my dad came down into the area we were getting married and looked at the dance floor and was like, it's not big enough. I know my son. I know their friends. We need to make this dance floor bigger. And I didn't even know, but they adjusted the dance floor, and he was right. That dance floor was popping, and I was plenty sweaty, and people needed some space pre-COVID. Like they needed some space for me. It rained on our wedding day. We had to adjust there. We were going to be outside. And then so anyway, anyone that's ever been married and knows like you're perfecting it, but then none of that really matters. You just adjust and you go with it and you flow. And that's where beauty occurs. So to me, the adaptive nature of perfectionism is actually, it's aligned with adaptive nature. And we need to not say, don't be perfect to our athletes. There's a notion now that says, go away from perfectionism. And I don't really agree with it. I think it's massively useful in preparation. And you want your performers to try to really drill down on excellence. And it requires a lot of work, back to that work preparation. And the key is to get rid of that perfectionism when we're performing, because no performance is ever perfect. And the best of the best realize that they just need to adjust and adapt. And there are all kinds of coaches who do a great job of adjusting on game day to make sure that their team is in a position to succeed.
I think what you're saying is very fair. I think as you're talking and I'm listening and I'm reflecting, I think that one thing I've been guilty of, certainly on my Twitter rambles, is to denounce to denounce perfectionism and how it can be very maladaptive. And I do believe it can be. And I've worked with players who suffer from a form of perfectionism that hinders them. However, I think that, as you've mentioned, research has suggested that having a mind turned towards perfectionism can be a help. It can drive, it can motivate, it can focus the mind, it can develop or increase commitment. And I love that word. I've always loved the word excellence. You used that in what you said there. I love striving towards excellence, but there is something about this notion of perfectionism that for some or even many athletes, serious athletes, that striving towards the detail, striving towards perfect detail is something that helps them, that drives them, and prepares them to go and compete. And then obviously I couldn't but agree with you with regard the capacity to be adaptable, in a competitive environment. And I can only imagine with Beyonce that what does she do if something's going wrong, if the lighting's not right, if somebody's doing something wrong in her crew, she stays Sasha Fierce, right? She stays in that kind of mindset. So I think it's an interesting landscape, and words matter and meaning matters, narrative matters. It's just not going. It's just making sure that perfectionism doesn't make somebody fall into maladaptive behaviors.
It's crippling. It is crippling for a lot of people. And so I don't take that lightly. And I'm not using this lightly. And it's why we have to practice our performance mind. It's why we have to practice being adaptive. And so to me, a great practice involves both of these. And I believe if you're using perfectionism right, just like humble, just like work, just like future, then we're more likely to tap into the performance mind as well. But we do have to practice the performance mind, and it's why it's important. And I've seen it hinder for sure. And my argument would be when it hinders people, it's because they're over-indexing on perfectionism and under-indexing on adaptiveness. And so the capacity to hold both of those is where you find elite performance. And you won't show me a elite performer that didn't have a level of perfectionism. And you might get to a certain level in your career where you've built the skills, perfected. And now you can show up and be adaptive. But I think the prime of most people's careers, they're blending both of these. And Beyonce is a good example. I mean, I have an amazing video. I'll send it to you afterwards where she talks about her perfectionism and how she drills. And then you see her on stage and she's winking. She winks, smiles, like she's adapting. She didn't practice winking, but she knew that she needed to tap into that performance mind in that moment. And so a lot of this requires awareness. Like we can't underneath all of this is an awareness of where am I? What do I look like when I'm at my best? And how do I cultivate this so that I can have clarity to tap into which of these I need and when I need to be in those spaces?
It feels like the next two shifts, and hey, come back at me if you feel I'm wrong here, kind of almost fit neatly together. I can see where they're side by side. Analysis and instinct, and then experimenting and trusting process. Just putting those two together. Talk to me a little bit about those.
So for me, analysis it's a detailed, you use the word detail in perfectionism, but detailed examination of the elements or structure of something, typically as a basis for discussion or interpretation. Analytics, let's just go into sports, have changed how sports are played. And any old timer that wants to tell you they haven't is lying. They have drastically changed how sports are played. Basketball, I mean, I saw it in the last 10 years. Basketball, the way the game is played, it changed because of analytics. And so we constantly need to analyze. We constantly need to break down what does stats say, what does the research say, and stay in that curious place. So analysis is really important. And we need to be instinct oriented. Like to me, it's the brain versus the gut. And I love the vagus nerve and how there's a second brain that exists in our gut, and how we often can make decisions from our gut and then we can make decisions from our head. So I really look at this shift as like, all right, some of the stuff we need to use our head for, and a lot of the instinct stuff we need to use our body for. So analysis is about the brain, instinct is about the body. And you mentioned the body earlier. I think great performers let their body do the work when they're performing, and often the mind and that analysis can get in the way. So for me, instinct is just a natural or innate impulse that is usually built based off preparation and analysis. But we just need to let go of the analysis when we're performing and get much more into instincts. Just like perfectionism can get in the way, I'm sure for your clients, you see over-analysis be crippling for athletes all the time. Interestingly enough, a lot of the coaches I work with will say, I overanalyzed when I was a player. And that's what makes them a great coach, because they spend so much time thinking strategy and analyzing. And then on game day, a lot of coaches, yes, they can impact substitutions, but that job is actually a lot of analysis and then occasional instinct. For example, I'm American, so our American football is a big deal. Yeah. The Philadelphia Eagles a couple years ago, ran this play that they called Philly Philly, where the quarterback handed the ball off to his tight end, and then the tight end came and threw the ball to the quarterback, and it helped them propel them to the Super Bowl. And they were actually mic'd up, and the quarterback came to his coach and said, "Let's run Philly Philly." And the quarterback looked at him and was like, "Let's do it." So he used his instinct there for that moment, but it was based on analysis that they had done, figuring out that play would work in that situation. The New Orleans Saints years ago did an onside kick in the Super Bowl that propelled them to win the Super Bowl. And that was an instinctual move that they wanted to, do. So my point with analysis and instinct is to get really clear on when you're analyzing and when you need to go into the body and be more instinct. Experimenting is to try or test or, especially in order to discover or prove something. You think about science, we're constantly experimenting. Researchers are always experimenting, tinkering, trying new things. And so it's important for us to try. There was an amazing research on peanuts and eating peanuts. I think it was done in Israel, where they realized that kids that had peanuts early created this immune system that could handle peanuts later on. And those that don't are more susceptible to the peanuts. So by experimenting with the peanuts, we develop this immune system to then be able to tap into trusting our process in performance, because we now know that we've experimented. So this is where I think process, Nick Saban uses the term trust process. It's become everywhere. The Philadelphia 76ers trust process. For me, trusting process is more about performance. It's this unquestioned belief and resolve. We're going to trust that we know how to do it. So the San Antonio Spurs use the phrase "pound the rock." And that comes from this Jacob Riis poem that says, a stonecutter knows that if he pounds a rock, it's not the one pounding of the rock that opens up the rock. It's 100 or 150 that constantly are pounding the rock. So for me, a golfer needs to trust their process and believe in their resolve, in their process for how they go through their routine and what they want to bring to the performance, and just have that unquestioned belief in themselves. So I think I look at Google, who created a study on what leads to great teams and high-performing teams: of psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning of work, and impact of work. A lot of that is a trusting of process. Trust and psychological safety go hand in hand. And then the dependability, the structure, that's process-oriented. So I think in performance, we really want to trust our process. So that's how I think about experimenting and trusting process. I know I just gave you a lot to chew on, but hopefully it makes sense.
No, I love it. And the next shift is uncomfortable and comfortable. Talk to me a little bit about
being comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's something that we hear all the time in sports psychology. Strength coaches will always say you need to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Absolutely. If you want to build muscle, you need to break it down and then build it up. So we need to have this stress or this strain. There was a cool formula in the book Peak Performance. I think you had Magnus on your podcast, Steve Magnus, or no?
Yes. Sorry.
Rest.
Yeah. Stress and
rest.
Stress and rest.
Him and Brad Stolberg talked about stress plus rest equals growth. Awesome. Love it. Right? Like, we need to leverage that. That's discomfort, like stressing and getting yourself into that space. And that's where we grow and we develop. It's huge. And when we're performing, we don't need to be uncomfortable on game day. Like, let's get ourselves as comfortable as we can. So you're in locker rooms all the time. What are guys doing when they're getting ready to perform? Maybe some are meditating, some are listening to music, some might getting themselves pumped up, others might calm themselves down. Like, I love the inverted U theory for arousal, and eyes off, which is, the individual zone of optimal functioning, and finding where we need to be in order to be our best. And I think it's really important for each of us to figure out, how can I get myself comfortable when I get into the arena? We talked about Beyonce, like what she's doing backstage to get herself ready it's different than what she's working on in preparation. So the idea here is to be step into discomfort or drive home on uncomfortability in preparation so that we can be as comfortable as possible in performance. I love the New Zealand All Blacks. You see them, like if you study them, and Legacy is an amazing book for those that aren't familiar. And you hear it, like they are constantly uncomfortable in preparation, yet on game day, stepping into a haka is getting themselves comfortable. And it's working their environment from the inside out. Regardless of where they are, they're going to do the haka to get themselves ready to perform. And it doesn't matter how silly or ridiculous they might look. Like, I think it's badass, but others might be like, what are they doing? They're grown men dancing and, doing faces. But to me, it's like, no, they're getting themselves ready to be comfortable. And it doesn't matter what the world thinks about us. They're not worried about judgment or shame or embarrassment. They're focused on what's in control rather than out of control. So I think those are all things that can really help us step into our best self when we're performing.
It's interesting, that notion of using the haka to increase your physiological arousal, your physical intensity, in order to adapt and subsequently feel comfortable in what is clearly an uncomfortable environment. An environment where it's brutal, you can get hurt, it's a game of violence, as one rugby coach used to say to me. So I like that idea of the All Blacks having the haka in order to get comfortable. And two more shifts. Again, they kind of feel like they're, similar-ish. Fear and fearlessness, selfish and selfless. Talk to me a little bit about those two.
Yeah, I'll try to make the distinctions on why I included both. So fear is concern or apprehension of loss. So we hear all the time, don't be afraid to fail. Show me a high performer that isn't afraid to fail.
Yeah.
I think Oprah once said, gosh, I wish I could live fearlessly. Well, you're Oprah. Like, you done okay. Like, you've done okay. Yeah. And perhaps her fear of failure has gotten her to this point in her career. And so people that are on the top of the mountain are so good at saying what you shouldn't do or don't follow my lead, yet they've blazed a trail there. If you're climbing Mount Everest, you better fear the mountain a little bit in your preparation. You better train with some fear and respect for climbing Mount Everest. Yet, when you get on the mountain, if you're so concerned with every step, you're gonna fall. Yeah. You're gonna fail. Yeah. And I look at like the Alex Honolds of the world who did free solo and climbed El Cap without a harness. If you watch that documentary, you'll see him toggle between the two of these. He'll fear failure in preparation, but then when he's climbing the mountain, like, he's smiling, he's fearless. He's not afraid that he's going to fall in those moments because he's earned it. He's put the preparation in. And there was a moment in the documentary where he went to go climb it and he just was like, nope, it's not ready yet. He feared it and he wasn't ready to do it. Or tightrope guys like Nick Walenda, who's walking tightropes over the Grand Canyon, once again, without a harness. Like, if you study these people that put their lives on the line, they often fear failure in preparation, but when it's time to perform, they're really fearless in that place, which is they're bold or they're brave. They're not concerned about loss. And so that shift occurs for me from fearing. It doesn't have to necessarily be failure, but having some fear or some anxiety in preparation, I think is healthy. I think anytime I do a podcast, I have some fear. And because of that, I prepare and I make sure I'm ready to roll. But when we're doing this now, like, I need to be a little fearless, like, step into it, go for it. Don't worry about the consequence. And then selfish and selfless, once again, just like fear, selfish is seen as a bad thing by most people in our society. And to me, the best performers in the world are concerned primarily with their own interests and benefits and welfare. They take care of themselves. They put their oxygen mask on first before they're going to help other people. And a great leader fills their cup, and they get that cup full, and then they give the overflow, the reserves to those around them. And too often I see this with parents. I'm at an age now with a lot of my friends have young kids. And I got great advice from a client of mine once who said, take care of your marriage first and the kids second. And it was brilliant advice. And I now with kids know, like, it's really easy to just be selfless. We talked about it at the beginning of this conversation. But if me and my wife don't take care of ourselves first, we can't help them. And so to me, there's this notion of being concerned with my own interests in preparation. What does that mean? Instead of getting shots at the bar, maybe I'm getting shots in a gym and getting extra shots up when my teammates are getting shots at the bar, right? Like, that's selfish. And maybe that's necessary so that when the game comes, they know I can serve them and they know I've got their back. And it's having little or no, selfless to me is having little or no concern with oneself and a desire to be part of something bigger than yourself. If you want to play team sports, and by the way, in life, we're all in a team sport. We're all part of this thing called humanity. There needs to be an element of selflessness that goes into that. But I believe if you're selfless all the time, you're going to get burnt out. You're never going to take care of yourself. You see this with sports coaches who they don't eat right, they don't sleep right, and then eventually they have to step away from the game and they can't be selfless to their family or their team or what have you. Urban Meyer is a good example of that, you know, having to step away from Florida and then sign a contract with his daughter. So I think too often selfish gets a bad rap. And I think also this notion that you're just going to be completely altruistic in your life and just be a servant leader, I think is a little, I think we do have to also take care of ourselves. And I think we all do to a certain extent. So look, I wrote this book to make an impact in the world, but it's also going to serve me. I'm not going to be dumb about it. I hope the book sells a ton of copies. I hope I make money off of it. You know, I hope that there's all kinds of good stuff that come from it. And hopefully I earn that right by putting the work in. And I think you can hold two things. Once again, like, I can be selfish in my preparation so that I can be selfless in performance. So I think to me, to conclude and wrap the book, I hope that those that are listening can take maybe 3 of these or 5 of these that resonate and really think about how they're showing up in preparation and showing up in performance, and then create systems and processes to practice their preparation and performance mind so that they can be their best. And if some of these don't resonate with you, totally cool. Like, I don't expect them to. If I was reading this book, I'd probably fight back and argue perfectionism or selfishness. No, not for me. Cool. I like it. If all 9 are perfect for you, I'm not so sure that I did my job. So hopefully you're thinking, and hopefully you're thinking about how you show up and thinking about the when. And I think that when is where greatness really lies. And when people get clear on when they need to be a certain way, I think that's where they unlock their potential.
Well, what I love is that, I mean, you've used this word thinking, and more and more on the Sports Psych show, I'm using this term thinking tool, which Dr. Andrew Abraham originally used on the show, and I love that idea, and I've shamelessly stolen it from him. Thinking tools. I think coaches need thinking tools. I think athletes, I think competitors need thinking tools, and this is what, you know, this book with these shifts articulates. Certainly, what I know, others know, but haven't always written it down. And I think as we were talking about this off air, that perhaps historically within the performance domain, within the sporting domain, we've been very unidimensional with our explanations. You know, we use a word like, say, authentic, and then we revolve everything around that. Got to be authentic. Got to be authentic. And it's like, well, actually, let's elaborate here. Let's actually look at these things on a continuum and understand that there's an inauthenticity and there's an authenticity. And with your 9 shifts, there's a humble and an arrogant, a work and a play, a future and a present, a perfectionistic and adaptable, an analysis and instinct, an experimenting, a trusting process, uncomfortable, fearlessness, selfish, selfless. And I think, brilliant. You know, there's continuums there. Which part of the continuum do we hit? And I'm sure there's word meanings, narratives within those continuums that lie on different continuums. So there's an element of complexity. And all what books for me and research papers and experiential evidence and the conversation we're having today, podcasts, etc., they're just designed to give us thinking tools that aren't relevant all of the time for all of the people, but relevant some of the time for some of the people. That's how I see it.
And the book does have how-to elements. So, working with athletes, like they often want the how. And so I tried to give how-tos. So there's also a workbook you can download on my website, which is strongskills.co and then /book. If you want to order the book, if you want to download the workbook, you can do that there. And so it's interesting because I think that each person can probably create their own shifts. And once again, what would success look like for the book is be like, oh, you look at these shifts and then you're like, wait a second, there's one that he didn't put on there that really is true to me. That would be awesome. Because I know working with my clients, we did this exercise all the time and they would come up with really creative ones that resonated with them. And I was like, it's so cool. So the book really came about from working with clients and being with them and them sharing this and them saying, how haven't I heard of this concept? And I go, because it wasn't until I read Tom Coughlin's book where I heard him say, be humble enough to prepare and confident enough to perform. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's simple. And then I started to do this exercise where we put a line down the middle. What's your preparation mind? What's your performance mind? And I started teasing out with these athletes in all kinds of sports. And then I would bring it to the corporate world and they'd be like, yeah, this makes complete sense. And then I talked to a mother of 3 who's at home raising their kids. And she'd be like, oh yeah, this is huge for me. And I'm like, this is simple. This is not complicated. Underneath it is complicated for each of us. But the framework of like, how are you setting your mind in preparation and how are you setting your mind in performance? And what are you doing to practice each of those? To be honest, like this is not rocket science. This is simple. And hopefully our world can read this book and start having that conversation. And yeah, you can probably hear my passion. I've been at this for 3 years working on it. And, I'm super stoked to have people read it and critique it. And, it'll be a humbling experience for me. I know for you, like, I'd be curious writing 4 books. The thing with writing a book that I'm fearful of is you don't get to take it back. Like once it's out there, it's in print and sure you can do another edition. But as I said, I know there's stuff in there that I'll read in a couple of years and I'll disagree with. And so for me, like I do care about making an impact in people's lives. And I just don't want the book to be used in a way that's not helpful and productive to people. And there is a possibility that there's something in there that I come to regret. I think it's likely, to be honest. Like I don't, if you've ever read your emails from a couple of years ago, you'll see like there's some stuff that you've put that in an email. You're just like, wow, either the tone or the words or like, it just, that wasn't really it. Or podcasts. Like you probably listen back to some of your earlier podcasts and you're like, wow, I was not on it or whatever. Like that's life. That's life. So anyway, yeah.
Well, it's as you said, just to closing thoughts here. I mean, it's as you said, as you mentioned with this podcast, you're on this podcast, you're putting yourself out there, and I've been on loads of podcasts, outside of the Sports Psych Show and other people's. And as you say things that you're like, oh, wow, did I say that? Was that the right thing to say? But you have to, it's almost cliche to talk about acceptance of mistakes, within sport these days. It's the same in everything. And when you write a book, you're going to write things. And then, in a decade time, you're going to look back and go, I don't really see it like that anymore. And I think for me, Brian, it's more nuanced in as much as I personally can look back at the books I've written and go, I would explain things differently and more nuanced than I did then. However, I don't disagree with what I'm saying. My experiences suggests that it's either not as black and white, or it's this or it's that. It's more nuanced. There's different sides to it. There's more complex. There's a continuum there. There's different continuum, whatever it is. And I think that's okay. That's okay.
I've been playing with this idea of curiosity and conviction. And for me, like, I want to live my life with curiosity and conviction.
Yeah.
And I think you could even put it into the framework we're talking about, like in preparation, be super curious, and in performance, have conviction. And the reason I think it's important, look at the state of our universe right now. Like, at least where I live, like, race is a conversation people are really having around race and racism. We're having conversations around, a pandemic. There is like complex stuff right now. And so I'm trying to remain really curious. And there comes a time where I have to have conviction in my beliefs and stand for something. Because if I'm just curious all the time, then I never really stand for anything. And so how do I stay open and then sort of have conviction to my beliefs? And it's one of the reasons I love empathy, because I think empathy, for me, when I step into empathy, I stay curious and I listen. And then from that space, I develop my own conviction, and I can disagree with someone even if they see the world differently from me. I can empathize with them. All right, I understand where you're coming from, and here's why I believe what I believe. So anyway, I'm trying to lean into curiosity so that I can have conviction in what I believe in. But I do think that we need to have conviction. Like, there comes a time where we need to take a stand and stand up and say, this is what I believe, and I might be wrong. So that's something I'm doing a lot of thinking around personally in my life, is how do I have both of those? Because I think they're both really important. And I am somebody who lives with some passion. I have energy. I have conviction. I'm not someone who is always being theoretical or philosophical. And I really love listening to people that are. Like, I love listening to highly curious people because I learn and I grow when I'm around them.
I think the coaching world is interesting there when it comes to whether we call it uncertainty to certainty or curiousness to certainty. It is, I think, great coaches are all of the above. And I think you can be all of the above in the same coaching session, the same coaching practice. I think, as a practitioner psychologist, I believe that I can be curious and be non-directive and be directive within the same session with an athlete. I think that's perfectly acceptable. I used to talk about coaches having a mask of certainty. So being uncertain into their day-to-day lives, but then coach with a mask of certainty. I'm less certain that that's true, in as much as I think you can still coach from uncertainty. But as you said, you also need to coach with certainty at times, with conviction. So I think that mask can come on and off instrumentally, on purpose. And I think that I like what you're saying, and I like the fact that you're kind of thinking as you're saying it, as I am now, because we can't be certain about these things. It's deeply uncertain. There we go. We've been very philosophical, Brian. I'm conscious of your time, so I'd like to close things by just asking you. The book is out in a few weeks' time. It's out in early October. Where can people find it? Where can people find you on social media and get in contact with you?
So my company is called Strong Skills. So you can go to strongskills.co. That's strongskills.co or .co/book, and you can find out all the information on the book. You can also look at my podcast, which is called the Intentional Performers Podcast, which you are going to be a guest on as well. So I'm excited to chat with you and get your perspective and flip the mic around and get to ask you a bunch of questions. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Brian Levenson. Instagram is intentional_performers. And I love LinkedIn. So my handle on LinkedIn is at Brian Levenson. So I actually like being on social. I think I've learned a ton from social media. It definitely has its challenges, but those are things I'm passionate about. And then I'm running a special offer before the book comes out October 6th. If you want to buy a bulk order for your team or organization, or you're part of a book club and you buy 20 plus books, I'll do a Zoom call for an hour. We'll give you a shout out on my podcast, and then we'll give you a shout out on social media. So definitely trying to get ahead and get those pre-orders in as much as possible. And I know that there are a lot of sports teams that are planning to buy it for their team, and then some companies that are going to buy it for their quote unquote team. So excited to do that. Love connecting with people, and really grateful that you've given me the time to talk about my book. This is probably the most I've talked about my book on a podcast. So it was fun to sort of stress test it and, get into the weeds on it. So thanks for giving me the space to talk about something I'm really passionate about.
Awesome. No, I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for your time, Brian. Well, everyone, that was Brian Levenson. Wasn't that awesome? I'm really looking forward to reading Brian's book and diving deeper into those shifts. As always, I enjoyed the podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.